Ever get that feeling? Like you're just going through the motions and suddenly kind of hit you like, wait, what's the point of all this?
Right.
We work and we try so hard to chase our dreams, but does any of it really matter, like in the grand scheme of things?
I know what you mean. It's a question that's been pondered for centuries.
Yeah, and today we're going to dive into something that might sound kind of intimidating at first glance. Nihilism.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
It is. But before you totally tune out, I promise this isn't going to be your typical like doom and gloom existential crisis session.
It's actually quite the opposite.
Right, exactly. Like the source we're looking at today is called The Paradox of Nihilism: How to Live Without Meaning and Still Win.
Catchy title.
Yeah, right. And even the title kind of threw me off at first, but the basic idea here is that accepting that life might not actually have like a built-in meaning, Like there's no cosmic rule book, it can be surprisingly empowering.
It really is. It forces us to confront those really deep questions about how we want to live.
Totally. So first, let's clear up what nihilism actually is, because I think it gets a bad rap. Like most people think it's just about being all doom and gloom and saying nothing matters. But what's your take on that?
Well, you're right. It is often misunderstood. I think nihilism at its core is more about recognizing that the universe doesn't just hand us a prepackaged meaning of life. Like we're not born with a purpose already stamped on our foreheads.
So it's like ripping off the Band-Aid of illusions and being like, hey, there's no cosmic Santa Claus deciding who's been naughty or nice.
Yeah, exactly. And when you face that reality, it can actually be incredibly liberating. Think about all those expectations that society throws at us. Like get a good job, buy a house, climb the corporate ladder.
Yeah.
What if those are all just kind of arbitrary rules we've been taught to follow?
That's a really interesting way to look at it. So if there's no inherent meaning, does that mean everything is just totally pointless?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
This is where things get really interesting. A philosopher named Albert Camus who explored these ideas. He talked about the absurd.
Okay, absurd, I'm listening.
Camus suggested that the lack of inherent meaning might seem, well, absurd. But we can rebel against that absurdity by creating our own meaning.
Wait, create our own meaning? Doesn't that contradict the whole idea of nihilism?
That's the paradox.
Yeah.
And to illustrate this, Camus used this powerful analogy, the myth of Sisyphus.
Sisyphus. Okay, refresh my memory. Who's that again?
Yeah. So Sisyphus is this guy from Greek mythology who's condemned to eternally push a boulder up a hill, only for it to roll right back down every time he reaches the top.
Oh, yeah. Right?
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like a fun way to spend eternity.
Yeah, it's not exactly a recipe for a good time. But Camus said we should imagine Sisyphus being happy. Like he finds meaning in the struggle itself, in the act of pushing that boulder.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this. So it's like, even if the task seems pointless from like an outside perspective, we can choose to find satisfaction in the process.
Exactly. It's about shifting our focus from the outcome to the journey.
Yeah.
Like if there's no grand predetermined purpose, then we have the power to decide what matters to us and find meaning in those moments. What resonates with you about that idea?
I guess it's kind of like saying, okay, maybe the universe doesn't really care if I succeed or fail. But I can still find joy in the act of creating and striving and experiencing life. It's empowering in a weird way.
It is. And the book we're talking about today, it actually dives into some really practical ways to actually do this, to live a fulfilling life even without a preordained purpose. For instance, it talks about the freedom that comes from having nothing to lose.
Nothing to lose. How can that be a good thing?
Well, think about it. When you're not absolutely terrified of failing, you're much more likely to take risks, to pursue your passions, to try new things.
That makes sense. It's like, hey, if the universe doesn't care if I trip up, maybe I should just go for it.
That's the spirit.
Yeah.
And that actually ties into another powerful concept the book explores, the idea that every single day is a blank slate.
Okay, so if we mess up today, tomorrow we get a fresh start.
Exactly. You're not chained to your past mistakes or your regrets. From a nihilistic perspective, every morning is a chance to create a life that excites you.
Okay, I'm liking where this is going. So it's not about pretending everything is perfect or ignoring reality. It's about choosing to focus on what we can control, what we can create.
You got it. And that's where this whole idea of intentional meaning making comes in, which might sound kind of contradictory at first.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. Like, how can we create meaning if we're saying there isn't any inherently... Doesn't that seem kind of backwards?
It might seem that way, but stick with me. The book argues that if the universe isn't going to hand us a purpose on a silver platter, it's up to us to define our own.
Like, we become the artists of our own lives.
Exactly. And the book breaks down some really practical ways to do that, which we'll get into later. But first, let's explore some of the core strategies for living a life that feels meaningful, even if you embrace this idea that there's no inherent meaning out there.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's hear those strategies. What's the first step?
The foundation is identifying your core values, like what truly matters to you, Vaishli. Compassion, creativity, knowledge, adventure. Those are just a few examples.
I think I'm starting to see how this all connects. So instead of looking for some universal rule book, we create our own internal guidance system based on what we truly value.
That's it. And instead of getting bogged down by like these huge goals that seem impossible to achieve, the book suggests setting micro goals. Think of them as tiny, achievable steps that align with those bigger aspirations.
So instead of, I want to write a best-selling novel, it's more like, I'm going to write for 30 minutes today.
Exactly. It's about finding meaning and satisfaction in those small actions that move you in the direction you want to go. What's a micro goal that you've been thinking about lately? Something that feels manageable, but also aligns with those bigger dreams.
Well, I've been wanting to learn to play the guitar for years, but it always felt so overwhelming. Maybe a good micro goal would be to just practice for 15 minutes a day.
There you go. That's perfect. It's something you can do consistently. And it aligns with your bigger passion for music. What's fascinating about this approach is that it ties in directly with the idea of embracing the present moment.
Okay, hold on. Mindfulness. How does that fit into this whole nihilistic framework? Isn't it all about accepting the meaninglessness of it all?
It is. But that doesn't mean we can't find joy and beauty in the here and now. In fact, realizing that life is finite can make us appreciate each moment even more deeply. Instead of always chasing some future goal, what if we found meaning in the simple act of experiencing life as it unfolds?
You know what? That actually makes a lot of sense. It's like, hey, maybe I don't know the meaning of life, but I can still appreciate this delicious cup of coffee right now.
Exactly. And the book talks about how powerful this shift in perspective can be, especially when we're feeling kind of overwhelmed by the vastness of existence. What are some of those little moments in your day that you could really savor?
I love that question. I think for me, it's those quiet moments in nature, like watching the sunrise or listening to the birds sing. It's so easy to just rush through life without really noticing those things.
And those moments can be incredibly grounding and meaningful, even if you don't believe in some grand cosmic plan. And speaking of finding meaning in the everyday, the book also highlights the power of creation.
Oh, yeah. Tell me more about that.
Whether it's through art or writing or music or any form of self-expression, the act of creating something new can be deeply satisfying. It doesn't have to be like a masterpiece or a world-changing invention.
So it's not about the end result, but about the joy of the creative process itself.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that this ties back to the concept of intentional meaning-making. When you create something from a place of genuine passion and curiosity, you're essentially saying, hey, universe, I don't need your permission to make something beautiful or express myself.
I'm really loving this idea of reclaiming our agency and finding joy, even in a world that might feel meaningless. This is all starting to make me rethink my whole perspective. It's like realizing that nothing matters inherently can actually make everything feel more possible.
That's the beauty of it. But there's another layer to this whole nihilism thing that we haven't even touched on yet. And it might be the most surprising part of all.
Okay. You've definitely piqued my curiosity. What else is there? This deep dive is getting deeper by the minute.
Well, we'll have to save that for next time.
All right, I guess we'll have to come back for part 2 to find out what that is. Okay. So we're back and ready to dive even deeper into this whole nihilism thing. Last time we were talking about finding meaning in a seemingly meaningless world, which I gotta admit is a pretty mind-bending concept.
Yeah, it definitely challenges our usual ways of thinking.
It totally does. But I'm starting to see how embracing this idea of no inherent meaning can actually be a catalyst for living a more intentional and fulfilling life. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're hitting on something really important. You know, when we let go of the idea that there's some grand, predetermined purpose for our existence, it can actually open us up to a whole new world of possibilities.
So instead of waiting for the universe to hand us a purpose, we get to create our own.
Exactly. And the book we're exploring really emphasizes that point. It talks about how this shift in perspective can even change the way we view mortality, which might seem like a pretty heavy topic.
Okay. Mortality as in our inevitable demise. How can that possibly be a positive thing?
Well, think about it this way. When we truly grasp the fact that our time on this planet is limited, it can be a powerful motivator to make the most of each day.
So instead of fearing death, we use it as a reminder to actually live.
That's the idea. The book actually talks about how awareness of our mortality can help us overcome procrastination. You know, we're less likely to put things off when we realize that someday might never come. What's something you've been putting off that you could tackle today knowing that life is precious and unpredictable?
Wow, that really hits home. I've been meaning to start writing a children's book based on a story my grandmother used to tell me, but I keep finding excuses. Maybe today is the day to finally sit down and just start writing.
That's a fantastic goal. And it's a perfect example of how acknowledging our mortality can inspire us to take action. And it's not just about checking things off our to-do lists. It's also about appreciating the simple things. Those everyday experiences that we often take for granted.
Like those moments of joy and beauty that we might miss if we're too caught up in the hustle and bustle of life.
Exactly. Knowing that nothing lasts forever can make us savor each moment more fully. Whether it's a stunning sunset or a heartfelt conversation with a loved one, or even just a quiet moment of reflection. What are some of those little things in your life that you could appreciate more deeply if you saw them through the lens of mortality?
I've always loved listening to music, but sometimes I just have it on in the background while I'm doing other things. Maybe I can make a point of really listening, really absorbing the music and experiencing it as if it were the last time I'd ever hear that song.
That's a beautiful intention. And it speaks to the power of mindfulness, of being fully present in each moment. And here's another fascinating aspect that the book explores. The idea that facing our mortality can actually make us more courageous.
Wait, courageous? How does that work?
Well, when you accept that there's no escaping death, it can liberate you from the fear of failure or rejection. If we're all going to die anyway, why let fear hold us back from pursuing our dreams, expressing ourselves authentically, and living a life that feels truly aligned with who we are?
It's like, what's the worst that could happen? I could fail. Well, in the grand scheme of things, that's not so bad.
Exactly. When you let go of that fear of consequences, you're free to take bolder actions, to step outside your comfort zone and to embrace the unknown. What's a risk you've been considering that you might feel more empowered to take if you weren't afraid of failing?
That's a great question. I've always wanted to try stand-up comedy, but the thought of bombing on stage terrifies me. But maybe if I reframe it as just another experience in this finite journey, I might actually feel brave enough to give it a shot.
That's amazing. And it perfectly illustrates how embracing the idea of our mortality can actually empower us to live more boldly and authentically. What's truly inspiring is that many people who embrace this philosophy end up being incredibly driven and successful, even though they don't believe in some cosmic purpose.
So it's not about achieving some predetermined goal set by the universe. It's about finding your own internal motivation and pursuing what sets your soul on fire.
You got it. And the book dives into some practical examples of how to do just that. One key strategy is to identify your core values, those principles that guide your actions and decisions.
We talked about that a little bit earlier, right? Like creating our own personal compass to navigate life's journey.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And once you've identified those core values, the next step is to set small, achievable goals that align with them. Instead of getting overwhelmed by huge abstract aspirations, focus on taking concrete steps that move you in the direction you want to go.
So it's about breaking down those big dreams into bite-sized actions that we can take today, right here, right now.
You nailed it. It's about finding meaning and purpose in the everyday, in those small acts of creation, connection, and self-expression. What are some actions you could take today that would align with your core values and move you closer to the life you want to create?
That's a really empowering way to think about it. I think for me, it would be about making time for those things that bring me joy and nourish my soul, like writing, spending time in nature, and connecting with loved ones. It's easy to let those things fall by the wayside when life gets busy.
That's a beautiful insight. And it speaks to the power of intentionality, of making conscious choices about how we spend our precious time. And it ties in beautifully with another key strategy that the book highlights, embracing the present moment.
We talked about that before too, right? It's about being fully present in each experience, even the seemingly mundane ones.
Exactly. The book emphasizes the importance of finding joy in the everyday, those ordinary moments that make up our lives. Instead of always striving for something bigger and better, what if we appreciated the beauty in the simple things?
That's so important, especially in today's world where we're constantly bombarded with messages that tell us we need to be more, do more, achieve more.
Absolutely. And the beauty of embracing the present moment is that it's accessible to everyone, regardless of their beliefs or circumstances. We can all choose to slow down, pay attention, and savor the richness of our experience right here, right now. What are some ways you could cultivate more mindfulness in your daily life?
One thing I've been thinking about is starting a gratitude journal. Just taking a few minutes each day to write down things I'm grateful for, even the little things.
That's a wonderful idea. Gratitude is such a powerful practice, and it can really shift our perspective from lack to abundance. And here's another fascinating aspect that the book explores, the idea of connecting with something bigger than ourselves.
Okay, that sounds intriguing. Tell me more about that.
Well, it's about finding something outside of our individual ego that we can devote our time, energy, and love to. It could be a community organization, a social justice cause, a spiritual practice, even just spending time in nature.
So even though we might not believe in a grand cosmic plan, we can still find meaning in our connections to others and to the world around us.
Absolutely. And feeling a sense of belonging and purpose beyond our individual existence can be incredibly grounding and motivating. What are some ways you could connect with something larger than yourself? Something that aligns with your values and inspires you to make a difference?
That's a great question. I've always felt passionate about environmental issues, so maybe I could volunteer with a local conservation group. Or even just make a conscious effort to reduce my own environmental impact.
Those are wonderful ideas. And it speaks to the power of aligning our actions with our values, even in the absence of a preordained purpose.
Yeah.
It's about creating a life that feels meaningful and fulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
Not because someone told us it should, but because it resonates with our deepest selves.
This is all starting to make so much sense. It's like nihilism isn't about giving up on life. It's about finding a new way to engage with it, a way that's more authentic, more intentional, and ultimately more fulfilling.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And the best part is, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. We each get to define what meaning and purpose look like for us based on our own values, experiences, and aspirations.
It's like we're given this blank canvas and we get to paint whatever picture we want.
Exactly. And that's a pretty exciting thought, isn't it?
It is. But I have to admit, it's also a bit daunting. Where do we even start? How do we actually put all these ideas into practice?
Well, that's where the rubber meets the road, and that's what we'll be exploring in the final part of our deep dive. We'll delve into some specific actionable strategies that can help you create a life that's meaningful, fulfilling, and uniquely your own, even if you don't believe in inherent meaning.
Okay, cliffhanger alert. I guess we'll have to come back for part 3 to get those practical tips and tools. This conversation is really making me rethink everything. I'm excited to see where we go next.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into nihilism. And honestly, this whole conversation has been like a total mind trip.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? It does. We've explored the philosophy and the paradoxes and even like the potential downsides of this whole idea that life might not have inherent meaning. But now I need some like practical advice, How do we actually live this stuff? How do we take all these nihilistic ideas and apply them to our everyday lives?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
The book we've been talking about, it actually offers some really concrete strategies for putting this philosophy into action.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me those actionable steps.
All right. Well, remember how we talked about identifying your core values? That's where it all starts.
Yeah.
It's about figuring out what truly matters to you deep down, regardless of what anyone else tells you.
Right, like creating our own internal compass to guide us through life, even if there's no universal map.
Exactly. And the book emphasizes that this isn't about adopting someone else's values or following some external rule book. It's about taking the time to reflect on what truly resonates with your soul. What principles you want to live by. What are some values that come to mind for you?
Well, for me, I think about things like honesty and kindness and creativity. And a sense of adventure. Those are the things that really light me up.
Those are fantastic examples. And notice how you phrase that, light me up. That's a great clue that you're tapping into something authentic, something that truly matters to you. And once you have a solid grasp of your core values, it becomes so much easier to make decisions and take actions that feel aligned.
It's like those values become a filter for all the choices we face every day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Instead of feeling lost or overwhelmed by all the possibilities, you have this internal compass to guide you toward a life that feels meaningful and fulfilling. And the book suggests another powerful strategy that works hand in hand with values clarification, setting micro goals.
Oh, yeah, micro goals. We talked about those before, right? Breaking down those big, scary goals into smaller, more manageable steps.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's easy to get paralyzed by the thought of achieving some grand overarching purpose.
Yeah.
Especially when we're grappling with the idea that there might not be any inherent meaning to begin with.
Right. So instead of aiming for, I want to change the world, it's more like, what's one small thing I can do today to make a positive impact?
That's it. Micro goals are those bite-sized actions that move you closer to your larger aspirations,
Yeah.
but without the overwhelming pressure.
And I remember you asked me about a micro goal I'd been thinking about. I mentioned wanting to learn to play the guitar. So instead of focusing on becoming a rock star, maybe a good micro goal would be to simply practice for 15 minutes each day.
Perfect. It's something you can commit to consistently, and it aligns with your passion for music. And the beautiful thing about micro goals is that they create a sense of momentum and accomplishment. even if the ultimate destination still feels far off.
It's like those small wins give us a little boost of motivation to keep going, even when we're feeling lost or uncertain.
Exactly. And when you consistently take action on those micro goals that align with your values, you start to build a life that feels both meaningful and fulfilling, even if you don't believe in some grand cosmic plan. What's fascinating about this approach is that it goes hand in hand with another key strategy: embracing the present moment.
Mindfulness. I'm curious how that fits into all of this.
It might seem counterintuitive, but realizing that life is finite, that nothing lasts forever, can actually make us appreciate the present moment even more deeply. Instead of constantly chasing some future goal or dwelling on past regrets, we can choose to fully experience the richness of life as it unfolds.
So it's like, hey, I might not be here tomorrow, so I'm going to savor this conversation, this cup of coffee, this feeling of sunshine on my skin with all my senses.
That's a beautiful way to put it. When we let go of worrying about the past or obsessing over the future, we open ourselves up to experiencing the beauty and joy that exist right here, right now. What are some moments in your daily life that you could really slow down and savor?
You know, I've always loved walking in nature, but I often find myself rushing through it, thinking about everything else I need to do. Maybe a good practice would be to really pay attention to the sights, the sounds, the smells, to really immerse myself in that experience.
That's a wonderful intention. And it speaks to the power of mindfulness, of being fully present in each moment, even the seemingly ordinary ones. And what's really cool is that these ideas actually connect to another key strategy: connecting with something larger than yourself.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me about that.
Oh, it's about finding something outside of your individual ego that you can devote your time, energy, and even love to. It could be a community organization, a social justice cause, a spiritual practice, even just spending time in nature.
You asked me about this earlier, and I mentioned being passionate about environmental issues. Maybe I could volunteer with a local conservation group, or make a conscious effort to reduce my own environmental impact.
Those are great ideas. And it speaks to the power of aligning our actions with our values, even in the absence of a preordained purpose. And you know what? This actually leads us to another important strategy: gratitude.
Gratitude. I'm a little confused. How does being thankful for things fit into this whole nihilistic framework?
It might seem counterintuitive, but the book suggests that even if we accept that life might be inherently meaningless, we can still choose to focus on what we appreciate. It's about shifting our perspective from what's missing or what's wrong to what we're grateful for, even the small things.
So instead of dwelling on the fact that life might be absurd, we make a conscious effort to notice and appreciate the good stuff, the things that bring us joy and make life worth living.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be big, monumental things.
Yeah.
It could be as simple as a warm cup of tea on a cold morning, a good conversation with a friend, a beautiful sunset. What are some things you're feeling grateful for right now?
Well, I'm grateful for this conversation, for one. It's really challenged me to think about life in a new way. I'm also grateful for my health and my family and friends. And the fact that I have a roof over my head and food on the table. It's easy to take those things for granted.
Those are wonderful things to be grateful for. And, when we practice gratitude regularly, it can actually rewire our brains to focus on the positive, which can have a profound impact on our overall well-being and sense of meaning and purpose.
This has been such an incredible journey. I started this whole deep dive feeling kind of lost, uncertain about, everything. But now I'm feeling this sense of hope and even excitement about the possibilities.
That's wonderful to hear. And remember, this is just the beginning. The real work starts now as you take these ideas and apply them to your own life. What's one thing you're going to commit to doing differently based on what we've discussed?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is the importance of mindfulness, of really savoring each moment. I'm going to make a conscious effort to slow down, pay attention, and appreciate the beauty in the everyday.
That's a fantastic goal. And remember, if you ever find yourself feeling lost or uncertain, you can always come back to this conversation and revisit these strategies. They're here for you whenever you need them.
Thank you so much for guiding me through this deep dive. It's been truly transformative.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, even though we might not believe in inherent meaning, we can still create a life that feels rich, meaningful, and fulfilling. The power is in our hands.
So to sum it all up, nihilism isn't about giving up. It's about waking up to the incredible freedom and responsibility we have to create our own meaning and live a life that's true to ourselves.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
And remember, even in a world that might seem absurd, we can still find joy, purpose, and connection. The journey is ours to create.
Thanks for joining us on this mind-bending adventure. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep creating your own meaning.